ado, let's begin with the webinar and with our first speaker today. So I'd like to welcome Devesh Sharma, founder and CEO of D Globalist. So he's going to be speaking on the global business expansion opportunities. And so let us get started on that. So just to quickly introduce Devesh to everyone. So he's a trailblazer behind the entrepreneur concept. Devesh is empowering founders through effectively driving businesses into the realm of borderless success. And before establishing D Globalist as the world's first global business mobility accelerator, Devesh honed his skills in the international arena, navigating intricate investments and operations within esteemed consulting firms such as Grant Thornton. So Devesh will address all of you aspiring extrapreneurs today who have joined us on the global business mobility trends, and also introduce the D Globalist extrapreneur cohort of 2024. So this year's cohort. So yes, welcome Devesh.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So thank you everyone for joining. It's our pleasure to host you all. I'm going to talk about why to move and whether you have to move or not. How do we move? I think Joleen and Tahmina are well versed with the respective areas. So let's take a step back on the mobility, why founders are moving, and who an entrepreneur is. Starting with the entrepreneur concept, which we created, the foundation of which was laid in 2020, when we saw traction on the international mobility side. The founders realized that the TAM increased drastically when they started talking to the international. The key trends which we are seeing in the key geographies, including Canada and UK, very encouraging for the founders. So what we notice is Canada and US and UK are heavily dominated by international founders. Unicorns in US have a founder who is from outside of US, and the stats are same and similar in Canada and UK. So this demonstrates the fact that there's a huge demand of foreign founders who can come to the country and fill the local gaps, which are of technology, of manpower, of new products. Next slide, please. Now, this is an important slide wherein we have mapped the factors which are important for you to discover your why. That why do you want to move outside of your domestic boundary? It's a big decision, so it has to be taken after due consideration of various factors. The reasons could be manifold. It can start with a higher TAM, which is like heavily dominating majority of the sectors. Second is a funding opportunity. Many of the startup founders, they look at US, they look at a large funding round as well. Third is the brand part, which is very important because when you look at international market, your brand grows internationally and has a higher reputation as compared to a local company. Next one is new learnings. Of course, when you tap into an international market, you And with new learnings comes new opportunities. Last, but which is very, very important, is the risk mitigation. At times, it's a regulatory risk or which you want to mitigate by diversifying your clientele into international geographies. Everyone talks about success, so we thought of talking about failure as well, because failures are important. Why companies are failing when they expand abroad. It's important to know first before you expand. A case study mapping here of a company called Hello, a UK-based company which expanded to US. So they are into online taxi booking. So they expanded to US, and they could not tap into the US market well because of various factors. And ultimately, they have to close the operations in US and focus on the local market. So what went wrong in their expansion? First thing, they did not do the market research properly. Second, they could not figure out the right technology for the local market. The technology stack which they were using in the UK market was very different than what was actually required US market. Third is, of course, the market was dominated by the local cab drivers as well as Uber. So they did not study the competition well. Lastly, their management kept on changing. They kept on changing the CEOs, so they could not focus on the international markets through a singular management in place. So these are the key factors. These are the key learnings which you can also imbibe in your international expansion journey. And it's important to learn from somebody's failure than to fail yourself. Next is about the success story, which all of us knows. Majority of the participants at this webinar is from India. So Freshworks, which is originally an Indian company, very few people would know actually that why did they incorporate in US. They could not figure out a right regulatory mechanism allowing recurring payment systems in India. And because of that, they have to set up their headquarters in US. They started back in 2010, and then they figured out that they have a hit in US. And everyone knows that they recently listed their company on Nasdaq. Between a failure from Hilo and a success story from Freshwork. The key differences without is these are the five, including the cultural sensitivity, which is very important. When you tap into international market, there are cultural differences as compared to the domestic one, which are important to be mapped out first. Second is the product customization. What is working in your home country need not to be the same as you are launching. You have to study the market well, and then only you can customize and launch your products in the target geography. Apart from that, there are other factors which are important. Strategic global placement. When you have multiple offices across the globe, you have to focus on one market through centralization. One office has to be in touch with all your offices globally, and then you have to decentralize the control as well to give enough liberty to the local offices to function well. Remaining are important factors like the data security and compliance. Compliance is non-negotiable, so it's important to study the compliance as well. Last, which is important, is a customer-centric approach. You have to talk to the clients before you move out and establish your permanent base. Next slide, please. So over a period of 5 years, now we've held many companies in the international expansion. So we were able to map the factors which are important when you expand abroad. Starts from the very basic of talking to an international founder who has set up the base. Knowing about their journey would help you in a local market from an international founder's perspective. Next is talking to the potential client. What could be better than the present world we are into? We can talk to a client remotely. So better to talk to a client legal. And once you turn legal, be very careful of the compliances. Like I said, compliance is always non-negotiable. Test before you go legal. Testing is important. A demo could work online, and I think it's important to have multiple demos of your product through various sizes of clients you are looking to cater to international markets. Next is proximity, that you have to be near company, and you have to have a local office. You can start small by by having a founder's office and then hire more people. Instead of hiring people at the very outset and not knowing the market. Having a local partner always help, and speed and patience are important. So it's important to go fast, but it's also important to build the brand first. So I'll take a minute to talk about D Globalist. Glad to mention that we are present in more than 10 countries through our domain experts, including Tahmina and Joleen, who are representing business immigration and corporate setups. In terms of why we have built the network, so we figured out that whenever any founder is they face various issues, including additional costs of resources, lack of connections, secondary knowledge. They trust on Google searches very often. They try to do everything themselves. And when they tap into an international market, they face long sales cycle. So we thought of resolving these issues by building a very strong network globally. US is a major market for us. So we built a very strong network in US of domain experts as well as CXOs who very often help our startups in international expansion. So happy to inform that we are starting a cohort in December. The intake would start from 1st September itself. The cohort would focus on 40 international founders and their companies from different sectors. And we will help them throughout their international expansion journey, including from the very first setup to helping them in gaining clientele as well. So this entire cohort, the theme behind cohort would be the borderless business setup, meaning that you have to be borderless in the new world, meaning that you can grow globally. So it's my pleasure to have you all, and questions are welcome.
As mentioned, if there are any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we can take the questions live. Actually, do one question that was written in, so I suppose I'll take this one. Dipesh, what key factors need to be considered when a company is selecting a geography for their business expansion? Or if you could elaborate on that.
I think if they have a client interest beforehand, that is super important. And apart from that, the right market fit is also important. What is relevant for a market might not be relevant for the other market. So broadly, these are the factors which are important as per my experience.
Right. Thank you so much. And thank you for an informative presentation on business mobility. Up next, we have Joleen Hughes. So Joleen is a D Globalist US partner and the founder and principal of Hughes Media Law Group, and with decades of industry experience spanning tech, gaming, music, entertainment, consumer products, and media. Joleen possesses excellent practical insights when it comes to innovative businesses. She oversees corporate strategy, including financing and business structure across borders. So throughout her legal career, Joleen has assisted some of the world's largest brands with company formation, operations, launch, fund growth, strategic alliances, deal making, and exit strategies as well. So today, Joleen will be speaking about corporate structuring options and compliance requirements in the US. So Joleen, over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's morning for us, evening for you. I'm so happy to be here, to be a partner with D Globalist, and to be here with Tahmina, who we work very closely together on all of these initiatives. And I'm going to talk a little bit, some very high-level concepts about corporate structuring here in the US, and also delve into that interfaces with Tahmina's area of expertise, as well as just giving you some sort of basic fundamental things to think about when you decide to operate a business in the US. So I think we can go to the next slide. So today I'm going to talk about the two business entities that are available to international founders, and they're very similar across the world in different iterations. The U.S. has, as you know, states. We are divided by not just a national but system. So the key thing to keep in mind about any sort of structuring is that it kind of is a spider web. So there's some basic things about setting up your company, but as you integrate with your business, what your business does, what type of product or service you offer, and your immigration requirements, it becomes a little bit of a spider web. So I don't want to give the impression that it's overly simplistic, because every iteration, every situation is different. It depends on the number of founders, it depends on where they're living, and a lot of different factors. So as long as you keep that in mind, that's sort of my legal answer. It just depends on your situation. And so you might hear that a lot from both Tahmina and I today, but it is actually true, which is why it's very important from a top level to understand when you're strategically making the decision to come into the U.S. You want to really think through and do a lot of pre-homework to come up with your options. Oops, sorry about that. In order to move forward. So let's dive in a little bit to the differences between an LLC, which is a less formal business entity structure, and a C Corp, which is more formal. And I've just highlighted some key differences here. Again, keeping in mind there's a lot of other factors at play. But if we go down the list of LLC, a limited liability company, this is a very easy structure in that it was designed to have a more easy effect for people to, it's less formal, for instance. You don't have the same formalities as a corporate structure. Now, LLCs are also governed state. So the one thing to keep in mind is that both LLCs and C Corps are governed by regulatory statutes in the state that you decide to register them. So if you decide to register in Texas versus Seattle versus Washington, which is Seattle where we're from, versus Delaware, which you've probably heard a lot about registering in Delaware, there's slightly different formalities in how you register and whether or not you need an agent or whether or not you need someone physically present and things like that. So that is a factor for LLCs and C Corps in either place. So an LLC, it combines elements of a partnership and a corporation. So there's a limit on the number and types of members as well. Owners of the LLC are not called shareholders, they're called members. Members are able to appoint what are called managing members to run the company. And there is no board of directors in an LLC. LLCs are governed by what's called an operating agreement. And an operating agreement is possibly the most important piece of setting up an LLC because it is your governing document. And like I said, every state has its own laws and formalities. If you not have an operating agreement, the default will be to the statutory setup governance operations. And the statutory governance operations are very generic. So if you have a lot of flexibility to adjust all of the things that you want to do in your business outside of the statutory norm. So in every state, that's the truth. So an operating agreement is also very important if you have one or more founder, or if you have more than one founder. It allows you to have access to bank account. It allows you to describe not just your relationship with how you're going to run it to the state you're in, but to the other founding partners or the other partners that you have in your business. And one thing that I would say that most medium-sized business who do not seek external funding, it's a good entity for you. Members also receive units, not shares. That's a very fundamental important. If you are thinking about corporate and I'm getting shares, I'm getting stock options or things like that, an LLC is not generally designed for that. It's not that complicated. There are some workarounds, but if that's something that you're interested in doing or incentivizing employees and staff with shares of the company, an LLC is probably not what you want to go with. A difference between an LLC and a corporation also is that 100% of the LLC units must be allocated. So when you form a LLC, if it's one or two people, if you don't have an operating agreement, it will default to the number of you. So if one person, for instance, is contributing more money, and that is something that is there's more value on that, and they want more shares or more units of the LLC, then you have to put that into a written agreement. Otherwise, it defaults to equal per how many people are in the LLC. LLC also, there's a tax kind of misnomer about LLCs and corporate. So everyone talks about the double tax on corporate, which we'll get into in a second. With LLCs, it's a pass-through entity. So the taxes and the profits and loss are passed through to the members. Again, allocated by your operating agreement or the statute if you don't have an operating agreement. One thing that I think people don't talk about a lot is that there is a self-employment tax associated with an LLC. And sometimes that, if you don't account for that, can really come up and bite you at the end of the year when you have to file US taxes. The self-employment tax is kind of funny because if you're an LLC, you can't actually be an employee. So it's sort of a weird idiosyncrasy here in the US. So if that is a structure that you're thinking of, that is something definitely you have to talk about your specific situation with your lawyer. The great thing about an LLC is, just like a corporation, it does offer liability protection for your personal assets, as long as you remain compliant with LLCs are also different from corporations, is that they're designed to be of limited duration. So if you don't specify in your agreement that you want it to continue, if certain events happen in an LLC, for instance, one member leaves, that can trigger a dissolution of the LLC. So there's lots of weird little rules about that you want to make sure that you are setting it up, because you don't want to inadvertently have your LLC dissolved if you have a very thriving business, just because somebody wants to leave. Transfer of units of an LLC, the units being the equivalent to shares in a corporation, are generally very limited. So they're limited because with 100% of all the units allocated, there's some level of approval required from your other unit holders to allow to transfer your units. Whereas in a corporation, they're a little bit more freely transferable. And again, just reminding you that state laws vary. So the operating agreement and the preparation leading up to the operating agreement is very key. So moving on to the corporate side of things, we have two different types of corporations here in the US, and the S Corp is not generally available to foreign. So traditional corporate setup has a lot more formal elements of operation. But there's no restrictions on number of shareholders or citizenship status. Owners of a corporation, as you probably everybody know, this is everywhere, are called shareholders. And just like most places in the world, we're managed by corporate officers, such as the CEO and all the different C-suite, and they're generally report to a board of directors. And again, just going to the LLC, if you are a owner of an LLC, you can call yourself a CEO, but it's technically not the correct term. So legally, that's not how you would sign documents, for instance. Okay, so moving back to the corp. Corps are governed by bylaws, which are the corporate setup. That's how the corporations run. and a shareholders agreement. And the shareholders agreement, much like the operating agreement, is the agreement amongst the shareholders on how you can buy, sell, trade shares. And that leads to all the different rounds of fundraising. So all of that is part of the negotiation as you go through levels of fundraising. Anytime that you're seeking financing, if you want to raise money or you feel like this is something that you possibly want to take the company public at some point, a C Corp is a really good choice because there also allows for different, just jumping down to a couple bars down, it allows you to allocate shares for different purposes, such as stock plans, compensation, advisory boards, things like that. You can also allocate shares for future potential partners. So for instance, if you have a business and you have 2 or 3 founders, but you have some spots open for potential founders to join you later in key spots, you can reserve shares for that sort of thing. Shareholders receive shares, so that's pretty self-explanatory. A corporation pays taxes on its profit. So this is sort of the double taxation situation that everybody talks about. So a corporation is its own thing, so it pays tax for itself. And then shareholders, when they get allocated dividends, they pay taxes on the dividends. And so one of the things I just want to highlight, and I'm not a tax lawyer, and I work with tax lawyers, but I can tell you from all of the years of experience, this is just something that kind of surprises people, is that when you're paying taxes on dividends, it's usually at a lower rate than if you're paying employment or self-employment tax or tax on income, whatever that is deemed under the tax law. So it's just a different percentage. So it technically is double tax, but you really want to be working very clearly and have a very good numbers person as you model out your business to make sure that you see which is better for you if there's a choice between an LLC and a corp for you. Because even if you want to do a simple structure, actually, can you go back? I'm not quite done. If you want to do a simple structure, you may decide to do a more formal structure because of those reasons. The same liability protection exists. It actually protects your personal assets as long as you remain compliant. It's a perpetual existence unless there's a legal dissolution or the shareholders vote to dissolve the company. Shares are freely transferable unless limited by a shareholders agreement, which often happens. And once again, state laws vary. So having all of your documents in place is very important. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Now, the one thing I really want to stress one more time is every situation is specific to you. So it's very hard for me to give, and I can't give specific legal advice to any particular party today because there's just so many details. And the details are further complicated, and I use the complication in a way because, again, the spider web effect about what your immigration and visa strategy is. Because all of these different things may or may not be appropriate for you depending on what your strategy is. And there may be extra documents, extra things that you have to work. So that's why Tahmina and I work closely together to make sure that all of these boxes are checked and that the strategy is developed together. So that way you're not constantly facing the situation where, oh my gosh, we forgot this, we forgot that. It's really important to have a very detailed strategic plan as you're making the expansion in with, how long things are going to take so you can really plan. So again, you must work with both an immigration and business lawyer if there's any sort of visa issue in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind is it is a major investment. I've worked cross-border transactions for pretty much my entire career. And whether or not you're coming from India into the US or you're going from the UK into Spain, wherever you're going, it is a major investment. And the major investment is not just hiring lawyers to help you. It is time consuming to get the details correct. You want to make sure that you have your tax strategies correct. And when you do all of these things and you plan accordingly, it gives you so many opportunities. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands that getting the details correct and cohesive requires a lot of transparency and trust in your team, because your team is here to really help you do the right thing, and knowing your specific situation, even details that you may not think are relevant, can be very relevant in easing and smoothing the way for you. And the one thing in the US is very true. Its costs are not inexpensive, but they can be mitigated with planning and preparation. And costs here in the US, this is not a barter society here in the US. So costs are what they are, and it's very difficult to try to say, oh, maybe we can get it less or that, because it just takes time, and time is very valued here. And so that's part of what the entire team, whether you have accountants or people that are setting up your office or your other advisors. Also factor into the ongoing cost of running your business, because there are going to be ongoing regulatory, accounting, legal requirements. And that goes all the way down to not just state, but local, city, and even county requirements. So for instance, in Seattle, we have a business and operations tax. So if you set up your business in Seattle, not only are you complying with US law, but you're complying with Washington state law, and also city law and county and city law. So it kind of goes into these different tranches. So what we do, what Tahmina and I both do, is when you are going into a different place, we also can work with other trusted advisors in those locations to help localize what you're doing. So if you wanted to go into Austin, Texas, or you wanted to go into Delaware, there's little idiosyncrasies with all of these, adding to the spider web. So again, consider your overall situation and your go-to-market strategy. And if you are organized and you have the right advisors, you can really get yourself to a situation where you can have expansion and you can make it as seamless and pleasant as possible, especially if you have the right team involved. And that's it. That's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Joleen.
Of course.
So, I mean, definitely a very informative and thorough presentation, and especially the comparative, presentation on the corporate structuring available for international business founders. It's very easy, I'm sure, for everyone to understand and to evaluate their choices to choose the best option for them. So that's great. If there are any questions, again, I would request our attendees to raise their hands and we can take the questions here. We alternatively, of course, do have some questions that were written in. So we can take that one for now. Actually, we have one question from the Q&A section here. Someone is asking, my company is a 30-employee startup and provider of global solutions. I wish to set up a company in the US. Is LLC recommended or C Corp? Founders are only 3.
Again, it's very dependent on what your product and service is. And it depends on what the agreement is amongst the founders, and what if any technology, what if any branding, trademark, patent related things might be affiliated with your company. And once again, are you raising money? Are you not raising money? Again, I will be honest with you, I tend to lean towards corporate structures, and I've moved away from LLCs a lot. But there are times when I will recommend an LLC if it's just easier. And sometimes the great thing also to keep in mind is that you can convert fairly easy these days in the US. So if you start as an LLC, it's not difficult to convert to a corporation if that becomes something that you want to do later. Now, I caveat that, and when Tahmina is going to speak soon, is that probably it was going to also depend on what your visa strategy is, because you don't want to do anything to subvert that strategy and do anything that's going to mess that up. So again, everything is going to have a caveat, and I apologize for that.
And I'd like to tell our attendees, of course, you can speak with us, speak with Joleen or Tahmina directly. If if you have any specific questions about your companies, we're happy to help even after this webinar. So yeah, wonderful. So let's move on to our next speaker. We have Tahmina Watson. So Tahmina is an immigration attorney in the US with over a decade of experience. She is a D Globalist US partner and the founder of Watson Immigration Law. She's also an author of 2 books on US startup visa and the host of the podcast Tahmina Talks Immigration. She was named Business Insider's top immigration attorney for startups and has been serving as the chair of the Legal Advisory Committee of the Global Entrepreneur in Residence Coalition. She represents US and multinational companies that need high-skilled workers from other countries, non-US businesses opening offices in the country, startups with founders from other countries, and investors expanding their businesses to the US. Tahmina will be addressing what visa categories are available for international entrepreneurs entering the US. So over to you, Tahmina.
Well, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here and hard to follow from Joleen. She's such an amazing speaker, and we're so grateful that she can be part of this effort. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I know it's an evening, possibly dinner time where you are, and you're giving us some of your time to learn some of this important information. So I'm very thankful to see you all here. Before we start, I wanted to tell you a few things, but even before I talk, while I'm talking, I would love to see your hands raised next to your name if you have raised funds in the United States or raised funds anywhere. It would help us to see where you stand in your business if you have been operating your startup through revenue generation or funds raised as well. So wonderful. So keep raising your hand so I can see that. And while that's happening, I want to mention my book. We don't have too much time to talk today, but I want you to know that there is a book that will be very, very useful for you called US Immigration Visa Guide for Startups and Founders. You can find it on Amazon, in India or wherever you are living currently. And anything that I speak about and you have more questions, you will be able to get those answers in the book. And of course, reach out to Joleen and I. And in addition to what Shivani said, that you can contact us. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn. We're constantly talking about these issues, and you will be able to learn tidbits from all the activity that we do and follow up on those. So next slide, please. Well, so thank you so much for raising your hand. So the following on from what Joleen said, the beginning of your conversation in the United States is often immigration. Actually, you start with your market research and you've made a decision to move to the United States, and you're sort of deliberating between corporate structures. And sometimes it's chicken and egg. Which one are you talking about first? And from my experience, my clients would often speak to me first about the type of visa that you will be pursuing. And that will depend on, do you have co-founders? Do you have clients already in the United States? Who needs the visa? Is it for yourself or your employees or your co-founders? How many people will move here? And have you raised funds already, yes or no? And so I'm going to start with the International Entrepreneur Parole, often also referred to as the International Entrepreneur Rule. Now, America does not have a startup visa, but this is the closest one that we have to a startup visa. And what that means is this particular program is based upon funds raised. or research and development grants that you might have gotten if you are already in the United States. Often people are in the United States as international students, or they have, they're working for another company. But let's assume you are currently in India or somewhere else, and you are trying to come into the US. If you have raised at least $265,000 US from a US investor, and your office is in the United States, that would give you the foundation to actually open your office in the United States. This is very much aligned with everything that a startup does. A startup is putting sweat equity. You're not always necessarily investing your own money, and you're really relying on third-party investments for your startup to, take shape and grow and scale. So international entrepreneur parole is a fantastic option. Up until this month, there was a lot of tension between how long these cases are taking, and that has not gone away. We really do not still know how long these cases are taking, but in March there have been reported about 3 cases that have been approved. And what that means is that the United States Immigration Citizenship Services is really trying to look at these cases a little bit more in depth, and they are trying to make sure that startups like you have the foundation to move to the United States. So if you have raised money in the United States with investors here, this is something that you should seriously consider, because it will mean that you do not have to create extra documentation necessarily outside of your general startup activities. The next visa is the H-1B visa. You probably have heard of this. This requires you to have a degree in your subject matter, and your job is going to be in that subject matter. You generally have to win the lottery, which is a once-a-year random selection process that actually closed on Friday the 22nd. Oh no, sorry, Monday the 25th. And it happens once a year. And for startup founders who often have a rush to get in the United States for whatever reason, whether your clients need you immediately, your investors are saying you need to be here immediately, the lottery will often be an obstacle in that. So there's a lot more information in the book, read about that. But there is also something called a cap-exempt H-1Bs. H-1Bs that are not within the lottery. And these can happen depending on the employer. If the employer is a higher education institution, if the employer is a non-profit organization that has a higher education affiliation, if it is a government research organization, or if it is a non-profit research organization. However, there are going to be some rule changes coming up very soon. They have been drafted and proposed. We have been given notice and comment period, and that is over. And in that, the cap-exempt H-1B program is going to see some positive, possibly expansion in the policies, that if the employer, meaning your startup, is actually in a university location or one of these other locations, you might be able to get the H-1B any time in the year. So it's going to be important that you examine that. The L1 is typically if you have a company abroad that is functioning already and you need to expand into the US, you could possibly examine, just like Joleen mentioned, who are the founders, what is the corporate structure, and could you possibly have that corporate structure mirrored in the United States? That's the L1. The O1 is if you have raised a lot of money, you have received a lot of accolades in your business, and there are many other, there are about 8 requirements, and you need to meet 3 of them. Your salary has been high, people have been writing about you, meaning publications have written about you. The O visa could be a great visa, and this can be applied for any time in the year. The Biden administration has made a concerted effort in trying to make sure these policies are startup friendly, because with the United States STEM shortage that we have, the Biden administration has been very strategic in making sure that the O1A visa, EB1 for the green card, which is a mirror of the O1, and the national interest waiver, these categories have been expanded in their policy so that startup founders like you can actually succeed in these cases. So depending on what your situation is, what your business status stage is, who the visa is for. If it's for a founder, you may have one strategy. If it's for an employee, there may be another strategy. And all of these would allow you to possibly use any of these visas depending on where you fit. So please, next slide, please. And once you have your visa, your temporary visa, and you're here, all of these visas will have time limits. The H-1B has a total of 6 years. You can have more than 6 years if there is something, what is referred to in the United States as I-140, the form for a green card. If that has been approved, you can stay beyond that. The L1 has only 7 years. The entrepreneur parole is going to be a total of 5 years. The O visa has similar limitations, but it can be renewed every year after a certain amount of time. So a green card becomes very important. The green card becomes important if you're going to be looking at a merger and acquisition or some sort of takeover. A green card becomes important if your children are going to be aging out. A green card becomes important if you're raising more money and your visa status has to change. Often, what I want you to take away is that these visa discussions are not something that is one visa for the rest of your life. It is a visa to see what is best for this moment. And what visa do you need as your business and your startup starts to, move forward in its growth? And I'd be happy to talk about more of this with you as your questions come up. But please note that the book is a great resource. It will give you a pathway from one visa to another to how you consider the startup journey with your immigration journey. So I know my time is up. I probably went up a little bit longer, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you so much, Tahmina. If there are any questions, we'd love to hear from you. And thank you again, Tahmina, for explaining how the immigration process for businesses works. I'm sure, visa and choosing the right route is certainly a major factor that so directly affects founders' decision-making when it comes to their business expansion journey.
Shivani, if there are no questions, let me just take the question that was asked of Joleen. My company is a 30 employee startup and provider of global solutions. I wish to set up a company in the US, and the question is about LLC or C Corp, and there are 3 founders. So if we take that scenario to see how that person will decide coming into the US, it will depend on what their founder's ownership is. Is it 33, 33, 33? And are they coming to the United States where the company is going to own the United States business entity, or are the founders going to mirror the ownership structure here? And that will depend, the decision for that will depend on talking to Joleen about tax benefits and other, which state are they going to be in, but it's also about their own personal choices. Sometimes there could be, founders have to be on the right page. Are they all agreeing to do this? And does it make sense? Are they going to have investors in the company? And will that change the share structure? So there are multiple different decisions that come from the immigration perspective that will then funnel into the decisions of the corporate structure, because your corporate structure will likely need to also be taken into account as your shares dilute and you get more investors and your cap table looks different. And so, the International Entrepreneur Parole, for example, is designed for startups. And the startup founders who are going to get their permission. Now, a parole is permission to be in the US, not a visa. And so when you're going to be in the US, you must own at least 10% of the business each person when they're moving to the US. But as you get investors, your shares are going to reduce or dilute. And the entrepreneur parole says you can't have less than 5% at any given time. If your shares go below 5%, boom, you are not eligible anymore. You're not maintaining status. So for anybody listening, it is really important that your startup growth is discussed with your attorneys at all times. Often I have found that my clients are discussing a merger and acquisition or a sale of their company without necessarily talking to me. I find out when we're talking about a visa renewal. And at that point, I'm like, wait, everybody's visas are going to be in trouble if you haven't talked about this foundational issue as part of the discussion of the merger and acquisition of or the sale, because whoever is going to take over the business, they're going to acquire the visas. And whether they acquire it or not will depend on, how is that asset management being structured? Are all the assets and liabilities being taken over? We don't know unless Joleen has done that assessment that she will tell me, and then we have to figure it out. So what I want you to focus on is what is the right thing for you to do now as you expand, not what's going to happen in 2 years and 3 years, because that's uncertain. So your visa movement will depend on the startup journey as that happens. So I hope that answers the question for whoever asked about that. I know immigration wasn't it, but it's really a part and parcel of it. Now, Ajay, thank you for asking the question. Any statistics on percentage approval for applicants of various, I personally haven't seen that many denials. It depends on the administration as well. In the previous administration, simple H-1Bs were being denied. And if you're asking about statistics, it's an unfair, way to give an answer on that, because it depends on administration sometimes where the goalpost changes. But what I will tell you is that if you are able to meet all the requirements of a case, and you have essentially met the categories, you've shown the government where your funds are coming from, and you meet the requirements of that visa, that's where a good lawyer comes in. Are you meeting the requirements of that visa? Then there is no reason you should not be denied, because you are telling them what they need to know. So strategy becomes so important, because when you're a startup, you may not have all the traction that the government is looking for. And how do we present your case in a way in which the government knows that you have potential? I'm going to share a story for you, just very quickly. I had once, this is, about, I can't remember, several years ago, one of my clients had come out of Techstars, and that client then sold their company, and the initial company that was sold, all the assets were taken away, had been bought out with the other company. So when that founder had served their time with the company that had acquired them, he wanted to come back to his original company so that he could deal with, create new ideas and go with his passion. And that old company, the first company, didn't have a lot of activity during the time he wanted to come back. Now, if there's no money, financial activity, no office, no employees, your case is inherently difficult. And then the strategy becomes, how do we prove that you deserve that visa? Ultimately, that case came to me from 2 different other lawyers who were like, I don't know if we can do anything with this, see what you can do. And, we got that case approved without an RFE. And so it's not about statistics, general statistics. USCIS will give you those approval data for each visa category. They have a statistics page for annual data, and you will see how many they've approved over the years. So if you're looking for approval statistics, you can go to the USCIS website. But your ultimate question about will you be approved, which that would be your concern. If you are doing everything right, you should be approved, but for an administration change or goalpost change. Okay, so any other questions? Let me see. I see 2 questions listed. Okay, I think I answered your question, Ajay. Thank you so much for such a good question.
Thank you, Tahmina. So next, we have some questions that were written in. So there's one for Devesh about the extrapreneur cohort of the Globalist. So someone wants to know if the cohort for 2024 is limited to any geography or sector particularly.
No, it's so we are sector agnostic and geo agnostic as well. Though I would see majority of the companies going to the North American side, but we are open to take startups which are even looking at the European market or other markets.
Okay, wonderful. And there's a question for Joleen next, which is, what is the patent registration process in the US when someone is entering the market?
Oh boy. I was gonna hit on this a little bit with the corporate setup. So again, it's a spider web. So there's a lot of different requirements on the patent side. And it just depends on what your product is and what type of patent it is. I feel like that probably would be a good subject for another webinar because it's a little bit more in depth. But you know, the patent process is my colleague who I work on the patent side of things with would tell you that it really, really depends on having a shepherding of the process. I know that having patents can help on the visa side as well, as Tahmina will probably agree with, especially if they're really valuable patents and innovative patents. But you know, whether you're going to have a utility patent or a design patent, or it really, really just depends on the process, how many inventors there are. You know, the one thing I will say is that patents of all the intellectual property are the most expensive. So you have to just bear that in mind too. And if you are taking one patent and having multiple claims on that patent, that, you know, it embellishes that cost. But from an investor side of it, I can tell you that when you do own patents, it drastically increases the value of your product and service, and that and your company, and your valuation of your company, in addition to, you know, actually having a strong brand here in the US. So it's a good investment, but I think it's one that is probably the subject of a more in-depth conversation than I could probably do today.
Thank you, Joleen.
I hope that helps. Probably.
Right. So one more question for Tahmina again about the EB1C EB1C category. So what is the practical salary and top line standards for the USCIS to approve this visa?
Really good question. Before I answer that, I just want to build on something that Devesh mentioned. The US immigration system is industry agnostic as well. So you don't have to have a visa for a hotel. You don't need, there's no specific visa for, you know, a teacher. Generally, it's an H-1B for that. But what I'm trying to say is, as a founder, don't think that I only have to get an L because I have a tech company. If you have a tech company, you can use any of these visas. It really honestly depends on what your current status and facts are. So I want to make sure that you understand that the only visas that are industry specific are the H-2A visa that's for at the agricultural industry. And so I wanted to make sure people understood that there isn't a specific one. The international entrepreneur parole is geared towards, you know, rapid growth companies. That's what the terminology is, but it's intended to be for tech startups. But maybe it could be for something else, you know, depending on the, you know, the facts that are being met with the with the startup itself. Because what is a startup? It's a business that's, you know, basically getting off the ground. So I just wanted to make sure that you understand that. In terms of the EB1C, it is a mirror of the L1 visa. The L1 visa is when you are transferring into the United States from one company to branch, one country to another country. Typically, if people know about Microsoft, for example, India has a large hub there. Often people are coming into the United States on an L1 visa because the H1B has the lottery that I mentioned, and there's no time limitation in when you can come here. And the L1 has a very nice sort of other side of the coin, if you like, or mirror image for a green card. The EB1 is for a green card. Now, how does that apply to a startup? It really depends on, I tell my clients, think of your case as a story. When does your story make sense in which that you need to now permanently live in the United States? The L1 will say, if you own majority of the business, show us that you intend to leave the United States when you're done. And so that's another reason where the corporate structure is important. Is the business owning it? Are you owning it? And that can have some implication. But when you have come into the US, depending on how that L was structured, or maybe it doesn't even matter, the L, where is your business at the moment to justify getting a green card? Do you have sufficient employees? Do you have enough funds? Do you have enough clients? There's an assessment to make. But what I will say is the L visa has a total of 7 years. And unlike the H1B visa, the L visa cannot be extended beyond the 7 years. The H1B will say, if you have an I-140 approved, you can extend, 3 years at a time until your green card is valid, which is very important for citizens who are born in India, China, Philippines, and Mexico, because these citizens of these countries have to wait a very long time to get a green card. The L visa, which is leads to the EB1, that is a different category, which is called EB1 C, but it's basically EB1 as a line item on the way on the system that the government looks at for green cards. And often there's a waiting time is less for Indian citizens. That can fluctuate. Sometimes there's no waiting time, meaning you can file your green card application immediately, or sometimes you have to wait. And so the top lines for filing an EB1 is the similar categories to the L1, but when you apply for it will depend on many factors of your business.
Okay, thank you, Tahmina. I think, that makes it clear for...
one other thing to just top line is to do the EB1, the business has to have been functioning in the US for at least 1 year. And
right,
so if somebody...
That's another question, actually.
Yeah, because if you come to the US on an L and you say, I just want to get a green card, I raised $1 million. If the business is not eligible, you cannot file for the EB1.
Right. Okay. And they have to be in the US, the existence of the company.
They don't actually, when you're filing for the EB1C, I have to double check that. I don't think you have to be in the US for that. And sometimes, depending on in the US, we have something called a visa bulletin. That's where the monthly visa allocation is, announced and how it's going to be distributed. And, for some of our clients, we had EB1s in the pipeline that we were going to file. But as soon as the visa bulletin was announced and suddenly Indian citizens were going to be waiting 4 or 5 years for filing their EB1s to have an impact, we had to switch gears and get L1 visas for them. And so policy decisions can often have a direct impact on what you're going to be doing. And in general, people will get the EB1 when they're in the United States, because the EB1 is not immediate satisfaction, if you like. Because it doesn't, unlike a H1B L, you get the visa, you arrive in the US. The EB1 is for a green card, and these applications, EB1 is the anchor of the green card. It is the beginning of the green card. The green card application has a separate process that can only be done if the EB1 is approved. So it's by far not a quick solution for whatever that intention will be, and therefore people should typically be in the US when they're doing that, unless they don't really care about being in the US. They just want to get here when the time is right. And often, you know, the age of children are a huge factor in these types of situations.
Right, right. Thank you so much for that explanation. Next one, we have a question for Devesh about, well, since you've worked with so many businesses over the years and some startups and helping them expand into other countries, with the US market particularly, what have been some key challenges that companies face when they're entering, and how can they avoid it?
So, of course, every startup before moving, they have a lot of questions, right? And those who have questions, they are able to navigate through easily. And those who move quickly, they tend to face challenges more than the first category. So the key challenge is, of course, the regulatory guidelines. As Joleen has mentioned, every state has their own law in US. So it's driven by the federal system as well as the state system, which makes it complicated at times. And therefore, it is important to take the legal advice. On the business side, the challenge is it's a large market out there, but that comes with a lot of competition, right? So the product customization, what they're doing in the domestic market is pretty different from the US market. So that change takes a lot of time, and they have to be, keeping patience during the gestation period, which is around a year. When they start, they can't just start getting clients in the year one. So patience is important, and that's the major challenge they have. Most of them, they think, now they have a LLC or a C Corp, they should start getting clients. But that's not the reality. It takes time to build the business. And I think that's the major challenge which most of the clients have.
Right. Thank you so much. And one more question for Joleen. Actually, pretty similar along the lines of the question we had for Devesh. So, with your experience, Joleen, what are some of the most common legal pitfalls that businesses encounter when they're just starting out their process to incorporate a company, and if there are any ways to avoid that from the get-go?
I'll say there's two, and one is in the US, we have a very distinguished line between what a contractor and what an employee is. And depending on which state you're in, there may be a inclination towards contractors or employees. So for instance, in Washington State, in California, very, very employee-centric states. So compliance with employment and how you treat employees and all of the different things that you do with employees can be shocking to the system if you don't know that, because employee lawsuits and employee and contractors who are treated are told they're contractors, but they're actually employees. That's kind of the big line. That's something to very much understand if you're going to be staffing at all in the US, and knowing where you're at and what the laws. We have a concept that's called at will here, meaning you can be fired or you can leave your job at any time. But there's also caveats to that dependent on your status as a person, whether you're whether there's an age-related status or just a classified class of people. There's just different rules, and it gets complicated. I think the other thing would be is just operations, and Devesh he stated it very well. It's you can get your corporate structure, you can get your immigration plan, you can have your team put together, but really figuring out your operations and streamlining your systems and I guess making sure that they're not just compliant, but sort of the norm here. It's really helpful to make sure that you have idea of how the customs and everything work here too. So if you have not done a lot of business in the US and you want to, it can be a different system. And I work with clients all over the world, And it's very interesting to me, just, whether it's, working hours, whether it's, just generally how you talk to people, how you negotiate. I think Americans tend to have a more direct and what people might think is a brash style, like we're just get to the point. And so you just want to make sure that you kind of try to fit in and have your own uniqueness, but also be able to adapt to that, which is not necessarily legal advice, but it's for sure operational advice.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Joleen. We have one more for Devesh. Again, since Tahmina has earlier mentioned rightfully that even the US market is very sector agnostic when it comes to all the visa categories that are available. But still, since there's so many startups that D Globalist works with on a regular, are there any specific industries, according to you, that would benefit from becoming a part of this US ecosystem of startups?
Well, SaaS is in a great demand. Majority of the companies from India, they are into technology, and most of them are providing SaaS platforms, right? So for sure on that side, but I think that's a more appropriate question for Tahmina, because she deals with different sectors of startups. So from our side, anything which comes around technology and scalable is in demand in US, but Tahmina can be more specific on this side.
The visa really depends on the business. It's like, seriously, that it's as simple as that. What are the facts? Who are the owners? What is the business plan? Do you have a degree to do the job that's required? Do you have a board that can sign your paperwork? You do have an employee that can sign the paperwork in the US. There are so many different factors to take into account to see how you present the case. One, for example, just recently, one of my founder clients, they really didn't want an office space. Office space is an expense that startups don't really want to take on, particularly during a post-COVID era when you can work at home and it is so widely acceptable now, as long as you don't have a cat filter, when you're having meetings. But for immigration purposes, you need an office, whether it's an L or an H or anything else, or an O visa. I practically begged my client to have an office. I'm like, if we want to make sure that your case does not get request for further evidence, because a request for further evidence means that the government is not satisfied with the documents that they have received. Therefore, they need more documentation. And that is stressful for the founders who need to focus on their startup. Immigration is a huge problem, a hassle, a headache, a burden on their shoulders when they have time-sensitive things to do to satisfy their investors. So, it's important that if your lawyer has made a recommendation, that you actually adhere to it, because they're not saying it just so you can, waste time. That's not the intention. It is to make sure that your case is successful.
Yeah, definitely. That absolutely makes sense. There's actually one more question for you, Tahmina. It's again about the EB1C category. And since you said that perhaps the business has to be in existence around a year in the US, so is there any profitability criteria also associated with it?
Generally speaking, yes. You want to the government doesn't say how much money or how many employees. And so it again comes down to the story of your case to see what makes sense.
Right. Yes. So it's going to be specific. And can the MD of that certain company apply himself or herself?
Managing director of the company?
Yeah.
Yeah, the EB1A C is structured for executives and managers. And so as long as they fit into those categories, that should work.
Okay. And is there a requirement to have sponsorship from a company in the US, or can this be a self-petition?
Are you talking about the EB1C still?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think the question is for EB1A, not EB1C.
Oh, yes, correct. EB1A.
So the EB1A is one of the 2 visa categories in which one can self-petition, meaning that you don't need an employer to sponsor you. And these 2 categories are incredibly important when it comes to founders, because for various reasons, sometimes they have to file on their own. But let's say there's an employee of a startup, and often in the US, for example, there are people, I live in Seattle, so Microsoft rolls off the tongue very easily. But let's say you're an employee at Microsoft, you can apply for an EB1A. It again doesn't matter which company you're at. It's all about you. Are you, quote unquote, a genius? And can you prove that on paper?
Right. So even with this, it really depends on the profile of the applicant.
That's right. And what we do at our office is we ask everybody to do a self-assessment, and then we go through all of their categories, and then we go through to see how their profile, either needs to be built or we help them. So the national interest waiver and which is an EB2 category, and EB1A, those are both self-petitioned. Both of these have had a lot more popularity during the Biden administration, because the Biden administration has been fantastic at, acknowledging startups and the various different types of technology. There is a list called critical and emerging technologies, and those get a lot of credibility if you're working in that. AI, for example, is getting a lot of credibility in these applications. So the EB1A and national interest waiver, sometimes people have to choose which is the better one for me. And in that case, you'll have to think about, well, which country was I born in? That's the first thing to think about, because that will be where your waiting time will eventually be. So there's no one size fits all for anybody. It's a case by case situation. And it's also, how good is your story? How well can we tell your story? And but it's not just you telling the story. You need a lot of people to help you corroborate your story. So there's a lot of work that goes into these cases. It's not easy, not simple, and not quick.
Right. Thank you so much for that answer. We have one question for Joleen, that's about production copyright. So how can you help us with registration of production copyrights for a film production house? And if yes, how does the process go briefly?
Yeah, I'm also, as I don't think we say that, but I'm also the IP partner for D Globalist. And that includes soft IP, which is copyright and trademark, and patents. So the copyright registration process is the least expensive and the easiest. So it's a really, truthfully, if you learn how to do it, you can do it yourself on the copyright website. The copyright website is very user-friendly. There's lots of periodicals, but I also think it's really helpful to, maybe on the first time that you do it, have someone walk you through, because it's a very archaic interface. And so if you're technology minded and used to really great UIs and interactive, easy interactivity, this will take you back to, probably the 80s or 90s when it was developed. But so it's really that bad. So there's some nuance to it, and there's also some requirements for copyright that are specific to the US, that every country is different with their IP requirements. And there's a very specific requirement that there's nothing that is part of any sort of tangible thing that you can register, like say a screenplay or an actual film that is AI generated. So anything with AI is not eligible for copyright protection. Okay. So it's a pretty easy process.
So Shivani, somebody asks which sector is in demand. So legal tech for sure, like Joleen mentioned, there's a need of improvement of technology on the copyright side.
For sure. There you go. Someone needs to develop it for them.
we can float that around now. So there's actually one more question for you, Joleen. It's about again the type of structure and what are the key considerations that people should keep in their mind when they're looking for the right business structure for their US business.
Well, hopefully, I think you'll probably circulate this presentation, so you'll have my little chart. But I think really the key is obviously if there's some sort of immigration element to it, that's probably first, because you want to make sure that we structure it correctly in the right place. How much and if you want to raise money, and if you want to raise money in the US or anywhere, that would make it very easy to say, just go to the corp. Or if it's just you and you want to be like your own if it's just you, maybe the LLC structure might be the best way to go. And also by state. It really is very dependent on the makeup of who the founders are, what you want to do. And but it really barrels down to probably your immigration and what you want to do with the company, and if you're going to take on investors. And you want, actually the third one would be if you want to use shares in the company versus units in the company, to set up different types of share types, say a stock option plan, say hold back shares for future investors, things like that.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, again, depends on the specific.
I wish there was some fast and easy way, but honestly, it does. I mentioned the spider web. It is a little bit of a spider web.
Right.
You don't know which direction you're going to go.
Yes. So yes, as you heard it, all the attendees, I would definitely encourage everyone to get in touch with us, and we will try to make this process as smooth as possible with our experts here. So those were all the questions we had, and we finished right on time. So thank you so much to all three of you for your time today. Actually, we'll just conclude the webinar, but it definitely has been very, very informative indeed. And, we hope that we get to host you again during the series of webinars that we're conducting on various options for business mobility in different regions. I think the next 2 months, we have quite a few webinars being done, and I'm sure that it would be interesting to all of our attendees today. And a big thanks to Joleen, Tahmina, and Devesh for your contributions to the webinar, and your insights and enthusiasm, I'm sure has been quite helpful to everyone who was here.